Greetings. Welcome to Occult Kubrick. Today is the first official episode of Occult Kubrick. You might recognize me. My name is Sean McCann. I run another podcast titled Wake the Dead. That can be found everywhere. Hopefully you are already aware of this. If not, please go and look because you will learn and it's fun. And I've done a lot of wonderful art over there, and I hope that you all will be would like to see it. Anyway, so this channel endeavors to explore the works and the genius of Stanley Kubrick, the filmmaker. Today, we will be focused heavily on the occult, mind control, and psychology in general when diving into this rabbit hole that Stanley Kubrick has left us with his art. So hopefully we will be answering questions that we have had, and hopefully we will be learning more deeply what he has given us. And with this specific, the channel being Occult Kubrick is intended for a reason, because what is hidden is where all of the layers can be applied. Like what is commonly referred to as an Easter egg. Kubrick can lay an Easter egg, but in that he will tie a lot more to that thought. And this is occult. And this occult investigation and looking at the allegory that has been occulted and the symbols, the knowledge that may be hidden in Kubrick's artwork for us to find. That is occult. It is what's hidden. I do believe that Kubrick's films were generally aimed at the occult and what is hidden. I believe that Stanley Kubrick's work is created to help our minds understand what is hidden. So that's this channel, Occult Kubrick. Welcome. I hope you like it. Anyway, for today's first episode, I thought it only fitting that we read from a book that Stanley used for reference to understand the occult. This is in his archives. I don't know. It's in with the boxes. This book, Cult and Occult, edited by Peter Brooksmith. This is what Kubrick used to inform him on the occult that he was portraying in Eyes Wide Shut. So this book is very hard to find. I was not able to find it. Okay, I did find it, obviously, because we're looking at it. So this is the PDF of a very expensive, large book. that was previously not on the internet. And I did some deep digging and I was able to find this book. So it is here for all of us to enjoy. Cult and Occult. Okay. Let's see. Peter Brooksmith. Guild Publishing, London. Let's see. 1980. It was first published in this form in 1985 by Orbis Publishing Limited, London. Okay. So that's what we're looking at, people. Contents. Now, we're not going to be reading all of this today, but I do want people who care about Eyes Wide Shut and Kubrick's mind and what he was making. I would like to share this with all of you who are interested, because this is a very expensive book and it is very hard to find. And I'm sure many of you would like to see the contents of this book. Okay. So, a guide to dowsing. That's where we start. Dowsing. Now this is giving us basically the history of the. Well, let's say okay. Symbols in the sky. Secrets of the zodiac. Okay, as above, so below. How to cast a horoscope. Knowledge by numbers. Okay. Numbered among the great. A glimpse of the future. I Ching. Trumps and tarot. Occult design. A sense of proportion, celestial harmonies. Let's see. Ritual and magic. This is where we're going to be focusing on today. Laying down the lore, secrets of the sex cults. Look younger, live longer. Sex, sin, and sacrament. Sex, sorcery, and seances. Possessed by the gods. Drumming up the spirits. Hitler and the Holy Lance. Legions of Hell. Was Hitler a black magician? On the side of the angels. And then it goes into alchemy. Search for the Philosopher's Stone. Saint Germain, Fulcanelli, the transformation of the alchemist, and witchcraft, father of witchcraft, witchcraft and worse. The wickedest man in the world, of course, Crowley. Mad, bad, and dangerous to know, Salem, Salem's grim legacy, the flower and the skull. That'll be interesting for all the deadheads out there. Okay. So we want to go to page 126. Ritual and magic. Every society is structured around rites, ceremonies, and sacred objects. Those that involve the ritual performance of the sexual act, the worship of the lance that pierced Christ's side, or the existence of the living dead are among the strangest and most disturbing of all. Laying down the lore. Alphonse, now this is a photograph here, or an image. Alphonse Louis Constant, better known as the magical writer Eliphas Levi, as a young man, constantly searching for a cause, Levi had devoted himself to the church, then to revolutionary politics. But it was only when he met the exiled Polish mystic J.M. Hohen Wronski that he found his life's work to become the world's foremost ritual magician. Laying down the lore. Modern students of the occult often cite the 19th century French writer Eliphas Levi as an authority, but Levi's own background in magic was far from the scholarly work it was deemed to be. At the present day, every great city of the Western world has a Polish community, men and women exiled from their homeland because of their opposition to the Polish government and its Russian masters. The situation was similar throughout much of the 19th century. Numbers of these exiles lived in Paris. Some took refuge in political plotting, others in mystical dreams, seeing Poland as the Messiah nation, a sacrificial victim whose sufferings would redeem the rest of Europe. Among these latter was J.M. Hohen Wronski, 1776 to 1853, perhaps the oddest dreamer of them all, the first occult teacher to inspire the French writer who called himself Eliphas Levi. Wronski was originally a soldier by profession, but abandoned the military life for philosophy and science, and made his way to France, where he supported himself by taking mathematical pupils. By 1810, he had come to believe that he had discovered the absolute. In other words, he had come, through reason, to a perfect understanding of the nature of ultimate reality and truth. He expressed this supposed understanding in mathematical formulae that proved incomprehensible, not only to laymen, but to other mathematicians. Nevertheless, so convinced was he of his own genius that he visited London in order to petition Parliament for grants and subsidies. Here he made such a nuisance of himself that one distinguished mathematician, a member of the scientific committee known as the Board of Longitude, opined that in the interests of social order, one must hope that Wronski will one night go to bed and not wake up again the next day. This gentleman's distaste for Wronski would probably have been even stronger if he had realized that the Polish savant was an occultist and mystic, a student of such strange subjects as Gnosticism and Kabbalism, who believed that by means of mystical process, ordinary human beings could attain godlike powers. In 1850, Wronski met Alphonse Louis Constant, 1810 to 1875, better known as Eliphas Levi, a hack journalist who had once trained for the priesthood but had lost his faith, dabbled in revolutionary politics, and become disillusioned, and was looking for a new set of beliefs that would give meaning to a purposeless existence. I love how this is edited and put together. Okay, getting back to it. To Levi, to use the name he adopted, Wronski expounded his doctrine of the absolute, his belief that Poland was the Christ of Europe, his interpretations of the Kabbalah and other mystical systems, and his belief that through the practice of ritual magic, men could attain semi-divinity. Levi was captivated. He threw himself into study, and of all the occult sciences, from alchemy to cartomancy, from magic to astrology. He rifled the libraries of Paris for esoteric books and manuscripts, reading them voraciously, and spent many hours with obscure soothsayers diviners, and magicians, and self-appointed prophets, hoping to extract wisdom from his long and often pointless conversations with them. He came to believe that these ancient texts of alchemy and magic were written in a symbolic code, and that if he could only break this code, he could learn the ultimate secrets of the universe and become the custodian of spiritual truths, beside which the discoveries and interpretations of Vronsky would pale into insignificance. In 1853, Vronsky died, mourned but not deeply regretted by Levi, who by this time believed that he had already surpassed his former master and was well on the way to receiving some great spiritual revelation. A year later, in 1854, he decided that his researches were sufficiently advanced for him to carry out an occult experiment, the evocation to visible appearance of the spirit of Apollonius of Tyana, a philosopher and wonder worker of the first century. Levi recorded that he prefaced this rite by 3 weeks of preparation and purification, eating only vegetables, avoiding other people, and carrying on imaginary conversations with the long dead sage. The preparations over, Levi, clad in white vestments and wearing on his head a wreath of vervain entwined with a golden chain, began the ceremony by lighting charcoal fires in 2 copper chafing dishes. On these, he burned various types of incense, their heavy smoke designed to provide the material from which the spirit of the philosopher could build himself a body. Levi began to read the words of the ritual he was employing. Then, as he stated, the smoke spread, floating above the altar. I heaped more fuel and perfume upon the chafing dishes. I beheld distinctively before the altar the figure of a man of more than normal size. 3 times, with closed eyes, I invoked Apollonius. When I again looked, there was a man in front of me, wrapped from head to foot in a shroud. I experienced an abnormally cold sensation, and when I endeavored to question the phantom, I could not utter a syllable. I pointed my magic sword at the figure, mentally commanding it to obey me. The form became vague and suddenly vanished. I ordered it to return and presently felt, as it were, a breath close by me. Something touched the hand with which I was holding the sword, and immediately my forearm became numb. I guessed that the sword displeased the spirit, and I placed its point downward, close by me, within the circle. I experienced such a weakness in all my limbs, and a fainting sensation came so quickly over me that I sat down, whereupon I fell into a profound lethargy, accompanied by dreams of which I had only a confused recollection when I recovered consciousness. The spirit of Apollonius did not speak to Levi, but the answers to the 2 questions he had intended to ask for it, one on behalf of a friend, one on his own account, came into his mind. The reply to a friend who had asked about someone's health was death. The answer to his own unrecorded question was similarly gloomy. Very secret secrets. Over the next few days, Levi once more evoked Apollonius. Each time, claimed Levi, the sage appeared and gave profound philosophical answers to Levi's equally profound questions. Unfortunately, the exact wording of neither the questions propounded nor the answers received was recorded. So it is impossible to estimate the truth of Levi's claim that Apollonius revealed secrets which might change in a short time the foundations and laws of society at large if they became generally known. If the secrets were indeed as astonishing as Levi claimed, it is rather remarkable then he proceeded to warn others against carrying out similar occult experiments. He wrote, I regard the practice as destructive and dangerous. I commend the greatest caution to those who propose devoting themselves to similar experiences. Their result is intense exhaustion and frequently a shock sufficient to occasion illness. Like I guess the flu? I don't know. Not many months after his raising of the, and there's some great pictures too. These, but I'm just going to keep reading here. Not many months after the raising of the ghost of Apollonius to visible appearance, Levi published a book entitled The Dogma of High Magic. In this and its sequel, The Ritual of High Magic, published 2 years later, Levi presented what he claimed to be an accurate account of the theory and practice of alchemy, ceremonial magic, divination, and the other occult sciences. In reality, these treatises are often grossly inaccurate where matters of fact are concerned. Many of his definitive statements are quite simply erroneous. Some of these errors were probably the result of carelessness in the use of manuscripts and other primary sources. Levi was a widely but not deeply read man. Others can be attributed to deliberate distortion for no other purpose than the production of exciting reading. Crowley might have done that a little bit here and there too. A particularly gross example is provided by Levi's account of the Trident of Paracelsus, a three-pronged fork inscribed with various mystical symbols. Levi asserted that the three prongs represented both the Christian trinity of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost and the alchemical elements, principles of salt, sulfur, and mercury. The trident expressed, Levi added, the synthesis of the Trinity in unity. Paracelsus ascribed to it all the virtues which Kabbalistic Hebrews attribute to the name of Jehovah, and the thaumaturgic magical properties of abracadabra used by the Hierophants of Alexandria. All this is unmitigated rubbish. Paracelsus certainly wrote of this trident. Equally certainly, he did not attribute it to all the virtues of the name of Jehovah. He regarded it as a device to be used for the cure of sexual impotence brought about by witchcraft. According to Paracelsus, those inflicted in this way should make a trident from an old horseshoe on the day of Venus and in the hour of Saturn, inscribe it with various occult symbols, and conceal it in the bed of a running stream. By this means, wrote Paracelsus, thou shalt be delivered in 9 days, and the person that has brought this mischief upon thee shall get something himself in that place. The genitals. It's bracketed in that place, the genitals. Ouch. All this is very interesting, no doubt, but it is a long way from Levi's synthesis of the Trinity in unity and the thaumaturgic properties of abracadabra. Designs upon the tarot. On occasion, Levi did more than distort the facts. He invented them to suit his purpose. Thus, for example, he wanted to prove the fortune-telling tarot cards were known to and employed by occultists of the 16th and 17th centuries. He therefore specifically stated that there were references to the tarot in the writings of such men as Abbot Trithemius, the 16th century scholar, and Nor von Rosenroth, the 17th century Kabbalist. In truth, there are no such references. Inaccuracies of this sort flawed all the literary work of Levi. Anyone who looks for reliable accounts of the history of Western occultism and the techniques employed by its devotees must seek elsewhere than in the writings of the French magician. Must seek elsewhere. Okay. Nevertheless, Levi's theories as to how magic supposedly works cannot be neglected, for not only are they interesting in their own right, but they have inspired whole generations of occultists, including the Russian Madame H.P. Blavatsky and the British magician Aleister Crowley. As far as Levi was concerned, three fundamental theories, which he called dogmas, explained all allegedly supernatural phenomenon, from miraculous healings apparently induced by holy relics to the table turning of spiritualist mediums. The first of these theories is the dogma of correspondence, an idea of great antiquity. According to this, the soul of a human being is a microcosm, a little universe that properly reflects in miniature the macrocosm, the great universe in which we live. Every factor in the universe has its counterpart in the soul, and by means of traditional occult practices, the magician can change the world outside himself by changing the little world inside. The link between the inner and outer worlds is the astral light, an invisible but all-pervading substance whose existence forms the basis of the second of Levi's dogmas. According to Levi, this astral, literally starry, light has a close relationship to matter, each physical object having an astral twin that is, in a sense, primary to the mage. The world of matter reflects the astral world rather than vice versa. In manipulating astral light, it is possible, said Levi, for the occultist to influence both the physical universe, to tip tables or heal the sick, for example, and the feelings and modes of consciousness in other human beings. This manipulation can be achieved by the trained human imagination and will. Levi's third fundamental theory is that will and imagination are real natural forces capable, when properly harnessed, of producing even more spectacular effects than those produced by, say, electricity. During his lifetime, Levi's theories attracted little attention. His books sold only moderately, and he eked out a scanty living by taking occult pupils, and many of his contemporaries regarded him as no more than a charlatan. Yet he had his disciples, men and women who believed that they had learned much of value from his writings. And there are those in the late 20th century who think the same. Levi's influence has proved an abiding one. In a sense, the ghost of Apollonius, raised by Levi well over a century ago, is still with us today, casting a long shadow. So we have some images. I'm not going to read all the images and describe, just reading the text here. Okay. So, next portion. Secrets of the sex cults. Ready, people? Here we go. Eyes wide shut. All right. Is the cult of Tantra simply an excuse for sexual excess, as is charged by its critics? Or are its sexual rituals the key to ultimate spiritual salvation, as the practitioners themselves maintain? There is a long history of argument on both sides. The entire universe is in perfect equilibrium, its two primary polarities precisely balanced, like a god and goddess locked together in divine and intimate union. The highest spiritual goal, therefore, is to attain resonance with that unsurpassable state through sex rituals. So say the followers of Tantra, a cult that originated in the ancient East and that has enjoyed popularity among Western occultists and mystics since at least the end of the 19th century. This cult continues to flourish largely in secret in modern day society. To the outsider, its rites may seem nothing more than an indulgence in promiscuous and apparently obscene sex. Even worse, perhaps, the rituals seem to smack of utter depravity and black magic. But in its purest sense, Tantrism is nothing of the kind. Tantra, from which the cult's name is derived, is a Sanskrit word meaning warp. It signifies a body of written teachings, the warp through which are threaded the supplementary oral and physical training and preparation, the weft, needed for the attaining of the personal and direct experience of God, the gods, the universal essence, the ultimate, however the seeker after wisdom and salvation chooses to envisage this ultimate goal. In fact, the sexually explicit, erotic, and some disgusting aspects of tantric rites take up only a small percentage of the entire written texts. Yet it is probably true to say that these practices and the powers they are supposed to confer are the main factor in the cult's appeal to Westerners. Tantrism has almost always been practiced in secret, and in spite of the increased sexual freedom and permissiveness of the late 20th century, it is still a secret cult. Although the oldest texts date back to only around the end of the 10th century, it is said that there were many more ancient ones which were destroyed by successive invaders of the Indus Valley and by Orthodox Hindus who tried to stamp out Tantra. Libraries of tantric scripts were burned, and cults, monasteries were razed, and priests were put to death. Not surprisingly, surviving teachers and followers went into hiding. Tantra, however, has much in it besides the sexual practices that offended the persecutors and appalls modern critics. In tantric philosophy, the two major gods who In tantric philosophy, the two major gods who personify the balanced polarities of the cosmos are Shiva and his consort Shakti. But it is the female Shakti who is regarded as the superior of the two, because she is seen as a primal, creative, active force, the mother goddess, the great mother, or great goddess. The tantrics have no caste system, consider women completely equal to men, and in many rites envisage the female partner as the physical vehicle of the goddess Shakti herself. The range of subjects that Tantrism treats is so broad that it covers almost all areas of occult philosophy. These include the creation and ultimate destruction of the world, an entire pantheon of deities, and their inner meaning and symbolism, yoga and meditation, astral travel, and heightened consciousness, prolonged longevity, and, of course, the sexual rites by which it is believed many powers and profound insights may be obtained. More than one commentator has noted that the medieval grimoires and rituals of the Western magician and sorcery seem to have been borrowed from Eastern Tantrism and dressed up in Western trappings. Long and difficult periods of preparation and training are essential for any form of attainment in the tantric system. There are complex breathing exercises, gestures, and postures designed to lead to the control of body temperature, pulse rate, and other automatic physical functions. Intense and profound mental exercises are performed, calculated to give the true will total control. The successful adepts should ultimately be raised mentally, bodily, and spiritually to attune their highest inner essence to the very quintessence of the universal spirit. This is often a religious goal, but there are many who would insist that Tantra is not a true religion. The texts that describe the necessary techniques of Tantra are couched in highly allegorical and abstruse symbolism designed to veil the inner meaning. The sections dealing with spiritual alchemy, for example, at first sight appear to be describing nothing more than the physical effort of attempting to transmute base metals into gold, but they are intended to be applied internally. Internal alchemy. Shakti yoga is the key to the real alchemical process indicated, and its exercises are based on the concept of the chakras, which might be defined as centers. Another name used almost synonymously with chakras is padmas, meaning lotuses. Chakras are said to be located inside the body, but are not envisaged as physical organs. Rather, they are subtle physical centers of energy located at the plexuses, nerve centers of the body. There are 7 major chakras. The lowest of these is the Muladhara, which is said to lie near the base of the spine. It is here that the feminine active principle, the goddess Shakti herself, lies dormant. She is symbolized as a sleeping serpent, the Kundalini, from Kundala, meaning coiled, and she waits to be awakened and eventually conjoined with Shiva, the male passive principle. Shiva, meanwhile, supposedly inhabits the Sahasrara chakra, Sahasrara chakra, the 1,000-petaled lotus in the crown of the head. The way to bring these deities together, say the Tantrics, is to awaken Shakti and cause her to move gradually up through the 5 intervening chakras. These are the Svadhisthana above the genital region, the Manipura near the navel, the Anahata in the heart area, the Akasa in the throat, and the Ajna somewhere in the region of the pineal gland. This last is the so-called third eye, beloved of Eastern and Western mystics alike, as an organ of occult vision. When the Kundalini has reached the 7th chakra, Shakti, and Shiva are united. The successful adept is then perfectly attuned to the universe itself. This puts the enlightened one in a superior position to the rest of the unawakened mankind, leading as it does to the highest order of wisdom and power. The successful tantric is, in fact, a part of and able to manipulate at will any segment or entity of the entire cosmos. It is a case of salvation through sex. But there are many pitfalls in this long, complex, and arduous process of tantric enlightenment. And if not undertaken properly with the aid of knowledge of a knowledgeable master, its dangers are very real. It is said that if the Kundalini force, which is likened to a kind of occult fire, gets out of control, madness or death can result. Another of the dangers along the way is that aspirants could be diverted by mundane desires born of their weaknesses and fanned by some of their achievements. The desire for wealth, longevity, power over others, to name a few, may seduce them away from the ultimate goal of divine union. The sexual rites themselves, if not undertaken in the spirit of discipline that it is intended, can obsess the practitioner to the point of bodily and mental collapse. These rites, the target of this of the severest external criticism, involve nudity, group sex, incest, and adultery. But although Tantrism has been described as a cult of ecstasy, it is not merely physical. Sensual ecstasy that is paramount. Tantric rituals are deliberately designed to make the selection of a partner arbitrary. There is no emphasis on youth or beauty or mutual attraction. At higher levels of attainment, there are even claims of sexual intercourse with goddesses, elementals, and female demons. One testimony to this has come from Stephen Jenkins, an English history teacher who was initiated into tantric sexual ritual in Mongolia. In his book, The Undiscovered Country, 1977, Jenkins explains that there are two stages in advanced tantrism, one in which the female partner is an ordinary human being, and another in which she is a being of another order altogether. The latter, he says, can take the form either of a skywalker, spirit said to haunt Western India and Ladakh, or even the great goddess Shakti herself. At the highest level of this particular method, the experience is indistinguishable from normal human intercourse at its intensest and most refined. I do not pretend to know how this works. I can only testify that it does. Two paths, one goal. It should be noted here that there are two different schools of tantric sexual rites known as the right hand and left hand paths. It is believed that many of the cults that flourish secretly in the West today adhere to the left hand path. In Tantrism, this simply means that in rites involving actual physical sex, the prospective female partners sit on the left-hand side of the male practitioners as the rite begins. In the right-hand path, the sexual rites are purely symbolic. So in the left-hand path, they do the deed. In the right-hand path, the sexual rites are purely symbolic. Francis King, an historian of ritual magic, wrote in Sexuality, Magic, and Perversion, 1971, that Edward Sellon, 1818 to 1886, introduced Tantrism to Britain. Although a few English and French academics had shown an interest in Hindu sex religion in the 18th century, Ceylon, soldier, fencing master, and pornographer, became acquainted with the tantric sexual rites in India, and his annotations on the sacred writings of the Hindus appeared in 1865. In the United States, possibly the first person to study and practice a form of sexual magic with some tantric links was Pascal Beverly Randolph, 1825 to 1871. He established various secret groups, one of which is believed to survive in France today. Like some Bengali practitioners of Tantra, Randolph used hallucinogenic drugs in his rites to attain heightened states of consciousness. Another cult with distinctly tantric overtones emerged in New York around 1919 under the name of the Braeburn Club, Braeburn Club. 3 words, Braeburn Club. It was headed by Pierre Bernard, who styled himself the Omnipotent, and his wife, Mademoiselle de Vries, a vaudeville dancer whom he had taught Oriental dancing, or who he had taught Oriental dancing and the basics of Tantrism. Mademoiselle de Vries also promoted a health system of Tantrism, attracting a succession of society people. Among these was a Vanderbilt, whose family was one of the wealthiest in the country. It was she who arranged for the Bernards to buy a mansion and estate at Nyack, New York, as a permanent home for the cult. The inner sanctum of this club was the Secret Order of Tantrics, whose members came to regard Bernard as a kind of man-god. Bernard and his wife aimed to teach men and women to love and make women feel like queens. A clear echo of the tantric belief in the superiority of Shakti. We'll get into that later in the podcast. One tantric aphorism actually says, Shiva without Shakti is a corpse. Other occult groups had already adopted some of the sex magic associated with Tantra. During the late 19th century, Karl Kellner, a wealthy German industrialist, had established an occult order based upon the sex magic he claimed he had learned while traveling in the East. This group developed into the Ordo Templi Orientis, branches of which spread throughout Europe and parts of Scandinavia. The magician Aleister Crowley became the leader of the British OTO in 1922, but he moved away from tantric ideas and introduced elements such as magical masturbation and homosexuality, and added degrees of adeptness of his own invention. He also used sex magic for temporal gain, which was not commensurate with tantric teaching. However, branches of the OTO continued to be established, and many still exist today in the USA as well as Europe. Evidence that links with tantric sexual ritual have survived into the late 20th century and beyond, now 21st century. Look younger, live longer. Have certain secret cults based on tantric sexual rites found the key to eternal youth? Those who follow them make the amazing claim that these groups can prolong people's natural lives. There are many surviving branches of the order, or of the occult order called the Ordo Templi Orientis, which has clear links with Tantra through the practice of sexual rites. There are also numerous claims to its leadership, but the most valid of which in Britain is that of Kenneth Grant, Although most Western writings on Tantra are somewhat vague on the subject of its inner mysteries, Grant's books, known as the Typhonian Trilogy, go some way toward revealing and analyzing the system. In these books, Grant unfolds some of the arcana underlying the symbolism of left-handed tantrism as practiced in the West. The bodily centers of Shakti Yoga, previously discussed, are referred to both as chakras and as padmas or lotuses, the lotus being the mystical sacred flower of the Orient. In keeping with the tantric use of the lotus as the symbol for the female genitalia, Grant interprets it as the flower or flower, the flowing one that gathers together all the mystical essences, stars, or kalas of the human body, and conveys them via the pudendum to the sacred leaf ready to receive them. Grant explains that the lotus, which is composed of these essences or secretions, flowers in the vaginal emanations that flow from the priestess. These secretions are collected for use in the various magical rites and for the consecration of talismans. Having access to esoteric interpretations of tantric ritual and practice, Grant quotes from an initiated comment on a sacred tantra. What is not generally known is that these secretions are not mere excretions, but are valuable fluids which contain in themselves the secretions of the endocrine glands in a much purer form and more fit for human use than the gland extracts and desiccated gland products of the present day organotherapy. The secretions of women are made in a laboratory of the deity, the temple of the mother, and they supply just what is needed by the human. Of the three kinds of fluids, the urine is the least and the weakest. Rajas or menstrual secretions is next, and bindu, the last, is a secretion not at present known to the West and obtainable only by means of the Shakta Tantra and their analogies in Mongolia, Tibet, China, Peru, Mexico, and elsewhere, a fluid that bisexualizes and rejuvenates to an extraordinary extent. Okay. I believe it might be known to the West. I think the porn industry knows about it very well. They make it spray everywhere. Anyway, the commentator goes on to say that at least 16 different types of bodily fluid from women are used in the Eastern Tantric system. The 16th, Sadhakya Kala, also known as the ray of the moon, being the most secret, to 2 or 3 by a priestess with whom they reside. To 2 or 3 by a priestess with, I messed up here, going back. Sakaya Kala, also known as ray of the moon, being the most secret. To lend some support to these assertions, Grant cites Havelock Ellis, a pioneer sexologist and crazy person, by the way, in his book, Studies in the Psychology of Sex. Ellis says that only 14 of the bodily secretions known in Tantrism are recognized by Western science. Exactly how the various essences are obtained and applied, however, is not revealed, nor are the precise results of their supposed effects. But there are indications that, in some way, they can retard or even halt the aging process. One highly secret group that would appear to have been successful in this technique is known as the Cult of Priapus and Ayana, which still functions in Britain, Europe, and the United States. The cult was named after two ancient gods, Priapus and the Ithyphallic god venerated. Priapus was the Ithyphallic god venerated by the ancient Romans, Etruscans, Greeks, and Pompeians because of his overt fertility. So Priapus has overt fertility, right? His consort Ayana had three breasts. She was regarded as submissive to him. According to Roman author, merchant, and traveler Lucius Marcellus, the cult's followers would present their daughters to the temple of Ayana to be trained as priestesses. In return, they would be admitted to the inner sanctum where they were taught magical powers, including the secret of eternal youth. The onset of Christianity and its persecution of pagan religions caused the cult to go into hiding, and it has remained underground ever since. Like the Tantrics, the Ayana cultists practiced indiscriminate sex, incest, and other forms of sexual rites considered to be morally degenerate. But despite the persecution of its adherents, the cults apparently survived and later spread. One of the ways in which the cult stays secret is by dispensing with regular mass gatherings. Its aspirant priestesses are usually trained individually or in small groups of 2 or 3 by a priestess with whom they reside. The inner sanctum of the cult's various branches meet only twice a year and always at different venues. The survival of the cult into contemporary times was discovered in the late 1950s by an American occultist, James McNally. But McNally's discovery was quite by chance, and being a devout Christian, he was horrified at what he saw. Consequently, he uncovered little more about the cult than its activities. Author investigator Justin C. Tanner gleaned some additional information. He found that there were 3 temples of the cult in the United States, one in Denmark, one in Britain, and possibly others. Yet another researcher, Arnold Weech, gained the confidence of the inner circle of the British Temple, and in 1978 published a pamphlet of his assessment of the cult of Ayana. He reported that he did not think the cult had any powers greater than those claimed by other occult groups he had encountered. Counting the years, Weech did confirm, however, that the group appeared to have some powers to arrest the aging process. In his opinion, a further 20 to 40 years could be added to the normal life expectancy, together with the retention of a youthful appearance. When he first encountered what he accepted ultimately as evidence of age retarding, Weech found it difficult to believe. He met a young girl who looked about 18 years of age, and only after I had met her daughter and granddaughter, who did not possess this power, did I even begin to believe such a power existed. Later, however, Weech met another member of the cult, a man who appeared to be in his mid-30s, and by sheer chance, I was able to check completely confirm his claim that he was born before the turn of the century. The man mentioned that he had served on HMS Iron Duke during the First World War. Weech happened to know a man in his home village who was an officer on the same ship at the same time, and he arranged a meeting between the two, on the proviso that the officer would promise not to mention the encounter to anyone else afterwards. The meeting duly took place, and within the first few minutes it became obvious that there could no longer be any doubt. They spent nearly 5 hours discussing old times and past events. The clincher came when our host produced a collection of photographs. One was of a gun crew standing in front of a gun turret, and there, smiling in the camera, was the same telltale scar on the point of the chin and looking only a little younger, was the cult member. As a result of his investigations, Weech came to the conclusion that the initiates of the cult did have the power to arrest the aging process, along with the ability to alter or change certain physical characteristics and develop mental powers to a very high degree, and one other power which I have promised not to disclose. This secret power would appear to be some manner of ensuring that each member remains absolutely submissive to the cult and does not disclose its existence or secrets to anyone. According to Weech, the Cult of Ayana does not charge for its membership, nor does it accept voluntary donations. Moreover, it does not actively seek new members and will not pander to the curious. Would-be members have their life thoroughly checked before being admitted, and if any of the details they have given turn out to be false, they are rejected. Those who are admitted are put in touch with a mentor who remains their only contact with the cult until the preparatory period is over. At this point, the candidate is then given the choice of joining for life or withdrawing. The elders of the sect have complete control, and any member who offends an elder is subjected to severe penalties, including corporal punishment. Weech states that in his monograph that none of the members with whom he came in contact had any regrets. A young married man told him, we have literally to grovel sometimes. Our particular elder has total power over us and can use us as he wishes. We can only obey. If he desires my wife, then he takes her, and I have no say in the matter. Some of the ceremonies strip away all human dignity, and yet we have no regrets. The diminishing of one's ego is a small price to pay for the priceless powers we now command. In an attempt to investigate the cult further, the author contacted Magdalene Graham, editor of the quarterly Occult World, which originally published Weech's pamphlet. She said, unfortunately, the cult of Priapus and Ayana has now gone deep underground and severed all links with other organizations. Asked if she believed the cult used tantric methods to attain their age-retarding process, she replied, I should think it extremely unlikely that the cult used Eastern methods, as they were extremely scathing of Eastern mysticism. They did state that they used sexual magic, but from the deliberate vague hints, it is obvious that this took somewhat unusual forms and probably consisted of acts which even in these enlightened times remain illegal. At one point, an occult group known as the Society of the Third Eye began to prepare a correspondence course, including a lesson on the cult of Ayana, but the sect subsequently asked that it be withdrawn. Magdalene Graham, who was involved in this project, reported, my personal contact with the real thing was, of course, via the Society of the Third Eye, when we were preparing the lesson on Priapus and Ayana for the course. And I am sorry that I cannot give you any details of this, except to say that we required proof before attesting to their powers. It is clear that there are cults in Britain, Europe, and the USA today that practice sex magic. They claim endows their initiates with occult powers. Even if they deny the tantric source, it is almost certain that the ancient cult of Tantra, based upon the symbolic union of the god Shiva and his consort Shakti, provided the initial impulse for such practices and beliefs. Sex, sin, and sacrament. The sex drive has been exalted by some occultists, denounced by others. Sexuality has long been a part of the magical practice. There has always been a curious ambivalence in occult attitudes towards physical sexuality. Thus, some occultists and some occultists and psychics have looked upon any and every sexual feeling or activity as pertaining to mankind's lower nature. According to this school of thought, absolute chastity, purity in thought, word, and deed is an essential prerequisite for spiritual advancement. Typical of this viewpoint was the medieval compiler of the Sworn Book of Honorius, a textbook of ritual magic. The Sworn Book of Honorius, a textbook of ritual magic, who solemnly advised his readers to be penitent and truly confessed of all sins, forbearing all female enticements, for it is better to live with a bear or a lion in its den than live with a woman. People are crazy. Other occultists and mystics have adopted a diametrically opposite point of view regarding sexual activity as an authentic sacrament, the outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace. Such a sacramental use of sexual intercourse can supposedly be employed as a means of acquiring occult power and, at its highest, lead to the ultimate goal of the mystic, union with the divine. Among the mystics who have believed this are the 16th century writers Cornelius Agrippa and Aratus. The former described copulation as full of magical endowment, while Aratus claimed that as the physical union of man and woman leads to the fruit from the composition of each, in the same way the interior and secret association of man and woman is the copulation of the male and female soul, and is appointed for the production of fitting fruit for the divine life. Production of fitting fruit of the divine life. Okay, sorry guys. Sexual symbolism was in common use among alchemists, as we will see, and some of them interpreted such symbolic phrases as the marriage of the Red King and the White Queen, not only chemically but also sexually. Some went so far as to attempt to manufacture the Philosopher's Stone, the mysterious substance that would transmute base metal into gold from human semen. Thus, the 18th century German records quoted by Christopher McIntosh in his historical study of Rosicrucian societies tell of an alchemical group that engaged in experiments of this sort. The leader of the group, an officer of high rank in the Austrian army, collected the raw material for this curious research by paying soldiers to masturbate. So Barry Lyndon was in the Austrian army. Um, anyway, the experiments ended in disaster. The soldiers under the officer's command were so enthusiastic to supplement their meager pay that they neglected their military duties in order to engage in almost incessant masturbation. Eventually, the regimental surgeon became aware of what was going on. The alchemical officer was reported to his commanding general and dismissed from service. And to add insult to injury, the alchemists failed in all their attempts at transmutation. Neither a ludicrous episode such as this, nor the occasional confidence trickster who uses mysticism and the occult as an excuse to engage in sexual fun and games, should be taken as an indication that all who believe sex to be capable of leading to authentic religious experience are mad or perverted. In the Western world, there has always been a complex interrelationship between religion and magic on the one hand and human sexuality on the other. Almost all mystical symbol systems, from astrology to the tarot, have been given sexual interpretations. Even the Bible has been subjected to the same treatment by some commentators. French magician Eliphas Levi believed that the fall of man, as described in Genesis, was sexual in nature. The original sin, which laid a perpetual curse on humanity, was Adam and Eve's first coupling. Russian mystic Madame Blavatsky, founder of the Theosophical Society, went even further. According to her, the first 5 books of the Bible are the symbolical narrative of the sexes and an apotheosis of phallicism. By phallicism, she meant the worship of the male sexual organ as a manifestation of the divine. I'm sorry for laughing, everybody. All right, moving on. Things not to be mentioned. Unlikely as Madame Blavatsky's assertion may seem, there may be a modicum of truth in it. Some students of the Talmud, the lengthy compilation and of ancient Jewish commentaries, would agree. According to them, the Ark of the Covenant, the holy chest made of acacia wood that the Israelites carried during their long wanderings and eventually placed in the temple in Jerusalem, contained a sacred stone carved in the shape of the conjoined male and female sexual organs. That's what the Star of David, the 6-pointed star, is the conjoined male and female organs. Okay, anyway. There would be nothing particularly surprising in this, for similar objects have been venerated by many cults. The ancient Greek mysteries or initiation rituals carried out at Eleusis, for instance, involved a rite called carrying things not to be mentioned. The unmentionable things in question seem to have been a stone model of an erect penis and a hollow stone symbolizing the womb of the goddess Demeter, who ruled over agriculture and fertility. Some occultists believe that the mysterious psychic energy produces all the phenomenon of the seance room, from table turning to spiritual materialization, and is at root identical with the energies that find their outlet in sex. It is the orgone, orgasmic energy of Wilhelm Reich, the odd of the 19th century mesmerists, the odd of the 19th century mesmerists, and the astral light of Paracelsus and other magicians. Okay, I get it. All right. Those who hold this theory point out that poltergeist activity is usually associated with a disturbed adolescent who is unable to earth his or her sexual energies with a partner of the opposite sex. The occult writer Benjamin Walker has gone so far as to claim that psychic researchers have repeatedly established that the center of poltergeist activity is often a persistent masturbator, and they believe it possible that the biomagnetic energy drawn by the poltergeist is obtained during the release of sexual tension when the masturbator reaches his or her climax. Excessive masturbation has also been cited as the reason for other unexplained psychic occurrences. Well, you better masturbate. All right, never mind. I'm not going to make any comments. Okay. Whether or not excessive masturbation can be productive of psychic happenings, there seems little doubt that at least some outbreaks of poltergeist activity are triggered by sexual mishaps or unhappy and complex emotional involvements. Take, for example, the so-called Great Amherst Mystery, the poltergeist haunting that astonished the inhabitants of Nova Scotia, Canada, in the autumn of 1878. It centered on 18-year-old Esther Cox. "Esther, you are mine to kill," said writing that mysteriously appeared on the wall of the girl's bedroom. The haunting featured just about every type of poltergeist activity, from outbreaks of fire and stone throwing to Esther's stomach swelling to enormous size. This last effect was presumably the result of swallowing air or some internal fermentation, for she reverted to her normal shapeliness after a loud report like a clap of thunder, but without any characteristic rumble. Okay, she farted really loud. All right. This must have been one of the noisiest poltergeist bangs ever, for Esther's mother leapt to the conclusion that her home had been struck by a meteorite and rushed to the bedroom of her youngest children to see if all was well with them. She found them sleeping peacefully and the house was undamaged. If, as seems likely, the poltergeist's thunderclap was Esther breaking wind with immense vigor, one is forced to consider the possibility that the knocks, bangs, sometimes drummings associated with poltergeists sometimes have a similar origin. It is perhaps significant that the noises made by the 19th century poltergeist known as the drummer of Tedworth were on at least one occasion accompanied by a mysterious sulfurous smell, which those present found very offensive. No such smells were reported by those who witnessed the Amherst hauntings. Perhaps there were none, or more likely, Victorian sensibilities prevented them from being mentioned. These allegedly paranormal happenings were almost certainly triggered off by an experience undergone by Esther on the 28th of August, 1878. exactly 8 days before the supposed poltergeist first manifested itself. 8 days. It involved Esther's boyfriend, a certain Bob McNeil. Bob, right? Evil Bob. All right. Okay. So it is provable that for some time Bob had been making overt sexual advances to Esther for one night of 20. Sorry, the Bob reference is not a Kubrick thing. That's a different director. Okay, that's for Twin Peaks enthusiasts will know about Bob. Anyway, going back to this, it is probable that for some time Bob had been making overt sexual advances to Esther. For on the night of 27 August, she had a nightmare replete with Freudian symbolism, clearly expressing the girl's fear of male sexuality. In this dream, all Esther's relatives had been magically transformed into huge bears with red eyes. When she opened the front door of her home, she was horrified to see hundreds of black bulls, blood dripping from their muzzles, converging on the house. She slammed the door shut and bolted it, but the bulls continued their advance, butting their huge horns against the house. The building shook under the concerted assault, and then Esther awoke. On the evening of the day following this ominous dream, Bob McNeil took Esther for a drive in a two-seater buggy, which he had borrowed or hired. They drove together into the surrounding wooded countryside. Bob reined in the horse and began to make amorous advances to Esther, urging her to walk into the woods with him. When she consistently refused, it would seem that she was prepared to indulge in a little light petting in the buggy, but nothing more. McNeil lost his temper. He pulled out a pistol, pointed it at the girl's head, and ordered her to accompany him to the woods. She still refused. For a moment it seemed that McNeil would shoot her dead. Fortunately, however, another vehicle approached. The alarmed McNeil pocketed his pistol, snatched up the horse's reins, and drove Esther to her home. That night he left Amherst, presumably in fear of being charged with attempted rape, and was never heard of again. In a sense, however, he remained with Esther for many years. The sexual cravings and fears that McNeil had aroused seemed to have built up in Esther a pressure of psychic energy, a sort of impending libidinal thunderstorm, which, failing to find an outlet in the ecstasy of orgasm, powered the spontaneous combustions, levitations, and other psychic wonders that astonished the citizens of Amherst. Many years later, Hereward Carrington, this psychical investigator, traced and interviewed Esther, by then married and living in the United States. She was reluctant to talk about the past, but made a most significant admission. From the day of her wedding, she said the power had left her. She was again a stranger to the paranormal. Some of these occultists and psychical researchers who assert that the subtle forces of the seance room and the sexual currents of the libido are manifestations of one mysterious energy believe that it can be transferred from one person to another. So the sexual currents of the libido are manifestations of one mysterious energy, believe that it can be transferred from one person to another. In this way, so it is suggested, the old can accidentally or by design draw in the life force from a younger person for their own benefit. The use of this curious psychic technique has a long history. It is often called Shunamitism, from the incident recorded in the Old Testament. Now King David was old and stricken in years. He gat no heat. Wherefore his servants said unto him, Let there be sought for my lord the king a young virgin, and let her lie in thy bosom, that my lord the king may get heat. So they sought for a fair damsel throughout all the coasts of Israel, and found Abishag, a Shunammite, and brought her to the king. And the damsel was very fair, and cherished the king, and ministered to him. Abishag regularly slept with David, but did not have sexual intercourse with him, for this would have earthed the life force and frustrated their intention. The same technique was used in classical Greece and Rome, seemingly with considerable success. Latin historians record, for example, the remarkable case of a certain L. Claudius Hermippus, who, when he reached the age of 70, began to feel a waning of his physical and mental powers. He immediately began to sleep with young virgins, though, like King David, without sexual activity. His tombstone recorded that he lived to the age of 115, owing to the emanations of young maidens, causing great wonder to all physicians. Many European rulers of the Middle Ages many European rulers of the Middle Ages practiced Shunamitism, sometimes in the homosexual variant. Thus, the Emperor Barbarossa held young boys against his stomach and genitals in order to savor and absorb their energy. Pope Innocent VIII, the immediate predecessor of the Borgia Pope, Alexander VI, employed healthy young children to stroke him and thus transfer their energy to him. Some physicians of the time held that this life energy was strongly concentrated in youthful blood. And Ficino, a Platonic philosopher who also practiced medicine, suggested that vampirism should be employed by those enfeebled by age. The old, he said, should drink fresh blood drawn from youthful veins, after the manner of leeches. Shunamitism survived into the 18th century and, in both Paris and London, was practiced on a commercial basis. For example, Madame Janice of Paris owned a successful establishment that at one time was reputed to give employment to over 40 virgins. A client's course of treatment lasted for 3 weeks. Each night he was given a magical bath containing herbs, then massaged with aromatic oils, and finally tucked into bed between 2 virgins, one blonde and one brunette. The treatment was, of course, expensive and had to be paid for in advance. In addition, Madame Janice insisted that each client deposit a substantial sum of money with her. This was to be forfeited by any man who was so rejuvenated that he deflowered one of his sleeping partners. A similar establishment, the Temple of Aurora, was conducted in London by Mrs. Anne Falkland, whose clients were reputed to include elderly aristocrats such as Lords Buckingham and Cornwallis. A belief in the efficacy of this almost vampire-like technique of acquiring psychosexual energy was among the strangely assorted articles of faith of Heinrich Himmler, sinister chief of the Nazi SS. Himmler, as well as carrying out his unpleasant duties with dry efficiency, spent much of his time thinking about such unlikely problems as the mystic symbolism of the Gothic architecture and the occult significance of the Etonian top hat. In 1940, he became concerned about the number of Luftwaffe pilots who died from exposure after parachuting into the North Sea. He decided that if such pilots were picked up while still alive, they would probably recover if they were placed between the bodies of naked girls. To test this hypothesis, SS physicians carried out a series of experiments in which concentration camp inmates were placed in tanks of freezing water until they became unconscious, and then were put in bed between naked girls. The efforts of the women revived several victims to the point at which they achieved coitus. But this depraved parody of shenaniganism did not lead to a higher recovery rate overall than did orthodox methods of warming the experimental subjects. So a warm water bottle is about the same as two naked women, but you can have coitus with the women. Anyway, sorry. I'm not making comments here. We're continuing to read. Okay. Sex, sorcery, and seances. Many Victorians seem to have regarded supposedly psychic activities as a cloak for scandalous improprieties. But some occultists insist there was more profound link between sex and psi. Okay, here we go. Seances were a craze in the late 19th century, but the trickery employed by so many mediums brought them into general disrepute. A materialization that may have been convincing in half light is here shown up as a ludicrous fake in the cold light of the camera flash. It is widely believed that the obligatory darkness of the seance also covered other kinds of impropriety. And the humorous cartoon of 1896 to the left exploits that idea. We see a man, a husband and wife doing a seance, and there's kissing happening in the darkness, and in the daytime or in the light, it is hidden, right? So what are we talking about here? The cult of Inanna, the priestesses of Inanna, right? The high watermark of interest in spiritualism was the period of 1850 to 1890. Throughout these 40 years, claims unremarkable phenomenon at seances. Claims of remarkable phenomenon, sorry guys. Throughout these 40 years, claims of remarkable phenomena at seances, from full spirit materializations to the levitation of mediums were commonplace. Once, however, the Society for Psychical Research, SPR, and other scientific investigators began to impose realistic test conditions on the mediums, such marvels first diminished and then almost ceased. So when real science was applied, all these claims ceased. At the present day, spirit materialization is very rarely claimed to occur, and so it seems it never takes place in the presence of non-believers and under rigid test conditions. There is strong reason to believe that every professional Victorian medium, with the possible exception of D.D. Home, practiced fraud at one time or another. Even those who may have possessed genuine paranormal powers were not adverse to practicing deception when the power was weak or the guide could not be reached. It is not surprising that men and women who were prepared to produce fake spirit phenomenon in order to extract money from the pockets of the bereaved were also prepared discreetly to defy Victorian morality. Some women mediums became notorious for this, and even spiritualist newspapers made veiled references to moral degradation as an occupational disease of mediumship, usually attributing it to obsession by evil spirits. A more likely explanation is that some mediums simply did not care about society's sexual mores. Allowance must also be made for the normally stern, repressed sexual emotions, fantasies, and memories, which were likely to erupt when any respectable Victorian entered a trance. In 1888, one anonymous member of the SPR reported that he or she had seen a medium, at other times calm and respectable, suddenly under some mysterious influence or control, break into a tirade of the most horrible, blasphemous, and obscene language, which drove all the sitters from the table, to which no persuasion would ever afterwards persuade them to return. Just words, people. Okay. Curiously enough, the writer of the above report fell victim to the same kind of phenomenon when experimenting with automatic writing. At last, the pencil settled down to a steady writing, and there came the most filthy, vile language, such as the mind could never have imagined. Okay. A cloak for prostitution. Spiritualism seems sometimes to have served as a cloak for prostitution and similar activities. A feud between two mediums, Florence Cook and Mrs. Guppy, drew some curious allegations concerning the latter. Mrs. Guppy was a powerful physical medium whose accomplishments had included the materialization of fresh flowers and a large block of ice at a seance. In January 1873, she found that her clients were being drawn away by what she referred to as the doll face of Florence Cook, who was young and attractive. It is of interest that Mrs. Guppy should consider Florence's appearance rather than her psychic abilities to be the reason for her increasing popularity. I'll read that again. It is of interest that Mrs. Guppy should consider Florence's appearance rather than her psychic abilities to be the reason for her increasing popularity. Mrs. Guppy decided to take drastic measures. In the guise of inquirers, a certain James Clark and two other friends of Mrs. Guppy, who were attended James Clark and two other friends of Mrs. Guppy were to attend a Florence Cook materialization seance when a spirit, whom they expected to be Florence Cook in disguise, manifested itself. They were to throw oil of vitriol, concentrated sulfuric acid, in its face. Mrs. Guppy tried to enlist the help of two American mediums, Mr. and Mrs. Holmes, in her scheme, but they indignantly refused and sent a warning to the intended victim. In revenge, Mrs. Guppy regularly sent roughs to break up the Holmeses' seances. She sent strongman to rough them up. Such activity ceased only when, in a letter to the London Dialectical Society, Holmes threatened to expose her. If necessary, he says, if necessary, I can give you the details of the infamous transactions of Mrs. Guppy with Miss Emily Barry. Miss Emily Barry, 1 Hyde Park Place, where she lives. Also, why Mrs. Guppy used her pretend mediumship for base purposes and gave seances solely for assignation to enable certain disreputable parties to further carry out their lewd propensities. It was just an act so she could do some prostitution. The meaning of the first part of this sentence is obscure. The second is explicit enough. In the 19th century, black magicians were usually those occultists who employed sex to unlock the gates that lead to the paranormal. There were a surprising number of these. Of course, they took care to avoid adverse publicity, intended to speak and write of their activities in coyly symbolic language. One such was P.B. Randolph, an American occultist who called himself a Rosicrucian. He believed that in the course of human copulation, both men and women produce psychic secretions, as well as the more familiar male and female lubrications, or male and female lubricants. These positive and negative psychic secretions, said Randolph, are thesis and antithesis, and combine into a new and higher unity that sets in flow a current of psychic force. If certain secret techniques are used for directing this current into the proper channels, both participants in the sexual act will receive physical, mental, and spiritual benefits. In typically vague and flowery language, Randolph described how he had acquired this knowledge. I made love to, and was loved by, a dusky maiden. I learned the fundamental principle of the white magic of love. Subsequently, I became acquainted with some dervishes. Right. Okay, I'll read that again. Sorry. I made love to, and was loved by, a dusky maiden. I learned the fundamental principle of the white magic of love. Subsequently, I became acquainted with some dervishes, and of these devout practices of a simple but sublime and holy magic, I obtained the elixir of life, the water of beauty and perpetual youth, and the philosopher's stone. Another 19th century practitioner of sexual occultism was Thomas Lake Harris. English by birth but American by naturalization, his method involved something he called uh, arc natural respiration, probably nothing more than deliberate hyperventilation of the lungs. But he had dabbled in an occult sexual technique that involved a couple breathing in unison while they copulated. An erotic astral link. An adaptation of this so-called simnumatada has been employed by black magicians of the present century for purposes of seduction. The would-be lover sits as near as possible to his intended victim. He gauges her breathing by the rise and fall of her breast, and once he has established the exact rhythm, begins to breathe in precise unison with her. The sorcerer continues this for a period of between 3 and 5 minutes, and then contracts the muscles of his anus for 5 to 10 seconds. This supposedly establishes an astral link between the two people involved by bringing into action the man's Muladhara chakra, a center of psychic activity that, according to some occultists, controls the libido. It is situated, they claim, in the part of the subtle body roughly corresponding to the area between the anus and the genitals. The magician then gradually increases his rate of breathing until it reaches the rate characteristic of the height of sexual activity. The astral link ensures that the emotions normally associated with this rapid breathing are communicated to the woman, and she immediately experiences sexual arousal. The magician then begins a conversation. Those who practice simnumata attempt to establish astral links with their victims for more than mere sexual satisfaction. Once the established link has been sufficiently strengthened, the bedmate can be transformed into a disciple, and thus it is averred one more black magician comes into existence. All this is very reminiscent of an ancient idea about vampirism, that its victims themselves become vampires, seeking out the living for nourishment. Many occultists have been well aware of such similarities and have theorized elaborately on the subject of psychic vampirism, draining psychosexual energy from the victim. This can be done in several ways, but vampires are supposed to be sufficiently powerful to absorb energy simply by sitting in the same room as the objects of attack, while others have to engage in astral projection and, in ghostly form, visit their victims as they sleep. Still others can extract the desired energy from a partner only in sexual activity. Really expert vampires, one group asserts, can sexually exhaust their victims to the point of death. In this way, the vampire not only obtains the physical strength of the victim, but acquires his or her soul as a familiar spirit. The Master Saturnus. An offshoot of the group that produced this absurd occult teaching was Saturn Gnosis, active in Germany from the 1920s until its suppression by the Nazis. It was revived again about 1950 by a man who called himself the Master Saturnus. The leaders of Saturn Gnosis taught an extraordinarily complex system of sex magic, either based on their own imagination and fancy or some secret tradition. The system is so involved that it seems hardly worth the trouble of following it. However beneficial the supposed results. For example, before engaging in sexual activity, initiates of the group were instructed to consult ephemerides, tables giving the daily positions of the sun, moon, and planets in relation to the zodiac. If Venus and Mars were square at the angle of 90 to one another as seen from the Earth, copulation should be carried out in a sitting position. The exact nature of the sitting position would have to be decided in accordance with astrological conditions. Thus, if Venus were in a stronger zodiacal position than Mars, the woman would sit on the man's lap. When the couple eventually decided on their appropriate posture, they were not to start their activities before burning protective incense and placing defensive occult symbols around themselves. The type of sex magic associated with Saturn Gnosis and similar European groups spread across the Atlantic in the 1920s and has continued to flourish ever since. For example, the Great Brotherhood of God was led by a one-time resident of Aleister Crowley's Abbey of Thelema. It was extremely Freudian. It was extremely active in the 1930s and attracted a surprisingly large membership. Louis Culling established a detailed account of his progress in this society. He had to pass numerous tests, in one of which he was required to engage in continuous sexual intercourse without ejaculation for a period of 3 hours. Culling not only passed all his tests, rising to high office in the Brotherhood, but carried out much research in the field of occult sexuality. His major triumph was his discovery that damiana, a Mexican herb traditionally reputed to possess stimulant qualities, was a psychic aphrodisiac. Those taking it, he claimed, benefited not only physically by becoming more potent, but also astrally. They became so filled with psychosexual energy that they were irresistible to members of the opposite sex. If Culling's published account is to be believed, a series of experiments he carried out in 1962 proved the paranormal effects of damiana beyond all reasonable doubt. The 69-year-old researcher began to drink a daily cupful of an infusion of the wondrous herb. After only 10 days, women over 30 years younger than himself began to take an interest in him. 4 days later, his libido bursting with energy of a man half a century younger, he left his Los Angeles home for a short holiday in the Mexican border town of Tijuana, famed for its bars and honky-tonks. With no trouble at all, he got into conversation with a young mistress who agreed to visit him at his hotel. Mortified by damiana, the couple engaged in extended and ecstatic copulation. The waitress was so delighted by her experience that she had stars in her eyes. Such, then, are the claims of the sexual occultists. They range from the absurd to the plausible. They suggest a two-way traffic between the psychosexual energy of the libido and the outer world. The libido, it is said, can move matter, as in poltergeist phenomenon. It can itself be revitalized and manipulated by drugs, by rituals, or by feats of psychic exertion. Diverse as these beliefs are, they are alike in the stress they place on a 20th century obsession, the central importance of sex. In the magical Haitian spirit religion of voodoo, the ritualistic dancing by devotees to throbbing drum beats and rhythmic chanting can climax in an ecstatic, trance-like state in which the dancer believes he becomes a divine being. A special interest in traditional dance forms took American freelance filmmaker Maya Deren to the Republic of Haiti in 1947 on an assignment for Life magazine. It was her intention to record on film the ritual dances that are central to many voodoo ceremonies. She aimed to be a completely detached observer. Her interest lay in the artistic elements of the dances, not in the religion of voodoo itself. Her detachment did not last long. So strong was the power of the rituals, she witnessed that her role of observer was quickly abandoned as she was swept up into active participation in the voodoo dancing and involuntarily entered a trance-like state on more than one occasion. She seemed to be possessed by the strange voodoo goddess Urzuli. The name is of African origin, who, according to voodoo believers, blends the sexual and emotional characteristics of the pagan love goddess Venus and Aphrodite with the compassionate and gentle characteristics of the Virgin Mary. This synthesis of elements drawn from widely different sources is typical of voodoo in both its religious and magical aspects. It is the magical elements that have attracted most attention from outside observers. Few Europeans remain unaware of such aspects of voodoo as zombies, the macabre and terrifying walking dead, and the rituals of black magic aimed at bringing about the illness or death of an enemy. Practices such as these, which often involve the use of blood, semen, poisonous herbs, and the remains of human bodies, are without doubt part of the darker side of Haitian voodoo. The late Francois Duvalier, Papa Doc, Haiti's sinister dictator, had an earlier and more innocent phase of his life written a serious anthropological and psychiatric study of voodoo. He was also reputed to use voodoo black magic against his opponents. Whether or not this was so, there is no doubt that black magic was used against him. On one occasion, his father's skeleton was stolen from its grave by anti-Duvalier sorcerers. The bones of an enemy's father are considered by voodoo magicians to be a powerful ingredient in potions designed to destroy that enemy. But the magical element is only one aspect of voodoo. As in other Afro-American spirit religions, the central core of voodoo is a deliberately induced trance involving the cessation of normal consciousness and the apparent possession of the devotee by one of the Loa, the gods and goddesses of the voodoo pantheon. This possession is not confined to the priests and priestesses who have undergone long periods of training and successive initiations into the inner mysteries. In most authentic voodoo ceremonies, as distinct from carefully stage-managed shows put on for the benefit of tourists, some of those taking part in the ritual dancing do at one time or another experience the state of trance and possession. Some of those who are seemingly in trance may, of course, be simulating the state. There are well-authenticated reports of possessed devotees suddenly reverting to normal behavior when confronted by an emergency. But there are equally well-authenticated accounts of Haitian peasants being spontaneously possessed by a loa when faced with a sudden crisis. A normally timid man might be possessed by the Haitian war god when confronted with a rabid dog. On the whole, most voodoo possessions seem to be genuine in the sense that the possessed man or woman is in a state of trance. In her book, The Divine Horseman, The Living Gods of Haiti, 1953, Maya Deren gave a fascinating account of the sensations preceding her loss of consciousness and the seizure of her mind by the goddess Urzuli. As she danced, she said she felt a strange numbness creeping upwards throughout her legs, a feeling so extraordinary and unlike anything she had previously experienced that she called it a white darkness, its whiteness a glory and its darkness terror. It flooded her body like a great force, threatening to burst her skin and explode her skull. Inwardly, she begged the force for mercy. In reply, she heard a shrill, unearthly chorus of Urzuli calling from within her own mind. Then she remembered no more until she came to 2 or 3 hours later. The Hungan voodoo priest told her she had shown all the characteristics of being mounted by Urzuli. The goddess had taken control of Maya Deren's actions in the way a skilled rider guides his horse. The analogy is misleading, however, for a horse retains its normal consciousness when being ridden. But devotees mounted by the Haitian loa enter a trance state in which they lose all consciousness of themselves and their surroundings. Since the Hungan assured Maya Deren that her behavior during trance was typical of the possession by Urzuli, and since the various loa always follow a predictable pattern of behavior when they possess a devotee, it is fairly easy to deduce what Maya Deren did during her descent into the white darkness. She would have begun by using the consecrated combs, soap, scent, and other toilet articles that are kept in voodoo temples for the exclusive use of Urzuli. The grooming process completed, Urzuli, in the body of Maya Deren, would have decorated herself with the jewelry kept for her. This usually consists of a large selection of cheap, flashy costume jewelry. It always includes 3 wedding rings, as according to voodoo belief, Urzuli has 3 husbands, in addition to many lovers. Queen for a day. Her toilet finished, her toilette finished, Urzuli would have chosen from among the worshippers several handsome young men to act as her courtiers while she moved among the congregation, introducing herself to each member of it. She would shake hands with the men, but extend only a finger to the women. Urzuli is not well disposed towards members of her own sex. regarding them as sexual rivals. Tired out by socializing, she would then either have demanded refreshments, iced cakes, and sweet, fizzy alcoholic drinks are her particular favorites, or taken her ease in an armchair, basking in the admiration of her worshippers. In either case, she would have behaved as though she was extremely happy, without a care in the world. Eventually, however, she would have begun to complain about something or other. The cakes were not sweet enough. Perhaps her drink was insufficiently iced, or her chair was in an inconvenient position. Apologies from the worshippers would not have satisfied her. She would have asserted that nobody really loved her and started to weep. Finally, in a storm of tears, she would have been led to a couch and fallen into a deep sleep, to awake as Maya Deren. Maya Deren's experience of the trance state transformed her attitude toward voodoo. Instead of regarding it as a web of interesting superstitions, a bogus faith whose devotees performed choreographically appealing dances, she came to see it as a authentic religion, incorporating ethical values and a lifestyle that she accepted as being in many ways admirable. As she pointed out, voodoo, together with other religions in which spirit possession is a central feature, is qualitatively different from the great religions of Islam and Christianity. In these, there is a sharp divide between creator and created, whereas the Orthodox Christian claims to have come close to the divine through the sacraments of the church, and the Sufi mystic may believe that he has enjoyed some contact with the divine. The voodoo devotee actually becomes a god or goddess and may also meet other divinities when they take possession of other worshippers. The core of voodoo is a blend of African spirit religions brought to Haiti by slaves imported by the French plantation owners. The word voodoo is thought to be a corruption of vaudun, which the Fon language of West Africa means God, spirit, or sacred object. However, over the 2 centuries or so during which voodoo has developed to its present form, the African core has been joined by other elements, notably popular Catholicism and degenerate European grimoire magic. Pictures of Catholic saints are found in most voodoo temples, where they are identified with individual voodoo gods and goddesses. The Virgin of the Sorrows, her heart pierced with swords, is identified with Urzuli. Pictures of St. Patrick, busily engaged in driving the snakes out of Ireland, are held to be portraits of Damballa, the serpent god, while St. John the Baptist is identified as Shango, a disagreeable African god of storm and thunder. This latter identification has probably arisen because, due to spatial climatic conditions, Haiti is often subject to violent storms in the days following the festival of St. John the Baptist. The Catholic Church in Haiti has fought a long and largely unavailing battle against voodoo, at times using the force of civil power to conduct religious persecutions in which voodoo temples and magical implements have been destroyed. In spite of this, the majority of the Haitian rural population remain convinced that there is a real connection between voodoo and Catholicism, and that the powers of voodoo and of Catholic priests in some way complement each other. As one voodoo believer told the anthropologist, the things of the church are always affairs of magic. This belief has caused a lot of this belief has caused a lot of trouble for the church in Haiti. The custodians of rural churches must be on constant guard against thefts of items such as holy water, consecrated candles, and sacred images, since all these are believed by voodoo practitioners to be possessed of occult properties. Even the most sacred ceremonies and festivals of the church have been made to serve as adjuncts to voodoo operations. On one occasion, so it is reported, a bishop of the church was induced to hold a solemn funeral ceremony incorporating a requiem mass over a gilded coffin that he was led to believe was that of a dignitary from a remote part of the republic. As the ceremony proceeded, an extraordinarily pungent odor, which was neither that of sanctity nor even that usually associated with decomposition, started to emanate from the coffin. The suspicious bishop suspended his officiations and demanded that the coffin should be opened. The mourners demurred, and when the Pope persisted, took to their heels. Inside the coffin, there proved to be a drugged, but very much alive, billy goat. Voodoo believers attend many church festivals where they worship their own gods under a guise of devout Christianity. At the Festival of the Palms, a Haitian Catholic festival held in July, the anthropologist Melville Herskovitz reported that he witnessed Catholic pilgrims being possessed by Erzuli and serpent god Damballa, and even the sinister Baron Samedi, the lord of cemeteries and master of black magic. It is remarkable that worshippers of Baron Samedi should have taken part in a Catholic pilgrimage, but for Baron and his assistant Guade are closely associated with the voodoo cult of the dead, to which the church is particularly hostile on account of its resemblance to European necromancy. The cult of the dead is practiced by only a minority of voodoo believers, and those who take part in its rites are sometimes held in awe tinged with fear by their neighbors. The most public manifestations of the cult takes place on All Souls' Day, when Baron Samadi's disciples, dressed in purple and black, the colors of mourning, flock to rural cemeteries and dance in honor of the Baron and his kingdom of death. This dance blends Eros and Thanatos, love and death, in a way that delights some Freudians. The dancers roll their eyes upward like corpses, sing in voices intended to imitate a death rattle, ballads of the utmost sexual grossness, and dance the banda, an imitation of human copulation that involves the dancers holding sticks in positions suggestive of erotic male sexual organs. Entities of death. This festival has two main functions. First, it provides the participants with the orgiastic relief from the grinding poverty and physical hardships of their everyday lives. Second, it provides them with the assurance that they are on good terms with the evil and dangerous entities associated with death. There are many such evil creatures in Haitian folklore. The most notable, apart from the zombie, are the loup-garou and the baka. The loup-garou is a kind of vampire. It is female, usually red-haired, and has bloodshot eyes. During the day, it appears to be an ordinary peasant woman. At night, it slowly drains the life from its neighbors by sucking their blood. Unlike the European vampire, which is reputed to go for the throat, the loup-garou makes its incision between the victim's toes. The baka are evil gods, or the spirits of black magicians who transform themselves into animals and roam nocturnally in search of victims whom they devour. One of the attractions of the voodoo religion is that its ceremonies are designed to protect the participants against evils such as these. But this is by no means its only appeal. Voodoo and other spirit religions, such as Candomblé in Brazil, number millions among their adherents, and it seems clear from their popularity that their common feature, the spiritual experience of being possessed by the gods while in a state of trance, satisfies some deep-rooted need of the human psyche. Drumming up the spirits. Although Catholicism is nominally the prevailing religion of Brazil, the sophisticated westernized lifestyle of the people is interwoven with pagan and magical elements of ancient spirit religions. That's the next page, I see. Okay. Brazil has a population of around 95 million and is often described as the world's largest Catholic country. Nominally, this is true. Almost every child born in the country is baptized, and most Brazilians receive the last rites of the church when they are mortally ill and after death, a full Catholic funeral. But while the Catholic churches and cathedrals are often crowded, the voodoo temples of Candomblé, Umbanda, and other Afro-American spirit religions, which in Brazil are collectively referred to as Macumba, are more crowded still. The practice of Macumba rituals is widespread throughout the country and does not take place only inside temples. Macumba ceremonies can be and are performed in isolated clearings and in the Amazonian jungle, at crossroads traditionally, as in Europe, popular places for magic rites, and even on Rio de Janeiro's famous Copacabana Beach, which is one of the world's most popular pleasure spots. This dual role of Copacabana Beach aptly illustrates the powerful hold Afro-American religion and magic have on Brazilian life. By day, the beach is packed with sunbathing tourists. By night, it is thronged with By night, it is thronged with macumbistas, worshiping a host of exotic gods and demons and casting spells designed to obtain love, money, or power, or even the death of an enemy. On New Year's Eve, Copacabana is the site of a major Macumba festival combining secular, religious, and magical elements, at which the gods of pagan Africa are worshipped together with the Catholic saints with whom they are identified. The principal object of adoration, however, is the African sea goddess Yemanja, who is often identified with the Virgin Mary. Yemanja is brought to Brazil by Yoruba slaves from the area of Africa that is now Nigeria. In Yoruba mythology, Yemanja was the daughter of heaven and earth. She married her brother and then coupled with her son, who fathered on her a whole tribe of gods and goddesses, among them Shango, the god of storm and thunder, identified by Macumbistas with St. John the Baptist. Ogun, the god of war and ironworking, and Orishako, a peasant god who rules over agriculture and female fertility. The name Yemanja is derived from the Yoruba word for mother and fish. She is the mother of all fish, and therefore queen of the ocean and everything under and upon it. For this reason, her chief festival is held on the seashore, and the offerings dedicated to her are given to the sea. As sunset approaches on 31 December, Macumbistas make their way individually or in small groups to Copacabana Beach, some on foot, some in cars. Many of Macumba's devotees belong to the prosperous middle class. And since the New Year's Eve festival is of national significance, many more come in motor coaches from temples hundreds of miles away. The worshippers are mostly dressed in white, Yemanja's favorite color, and they carry candles and gifts to be offered to the goddess. Each devotee places lighted candles in a previously dug hole, carefully walled with sand as a protection against the wind. The offerings, which may be mirrors, bottles of scent, hair ribbons, or in the case of prosperous businessmen, expensive bottles. Oh, wait, whoops. Yeah, no, that's right. Okay. In the case of prosperous businessmen, expensive bottles of imported bourbon are placed nearby. Each devotee then looks fixedly into the flames of the flickering candles and asks Yemanja for some favor. The more candles there are, the better. It seems that either Yemanja likes the smell of burning wax, or she wants her worshippers to spend as much money as possible to show their devotion. Whether the number of candles offered is odd or even is important. If the devotee wants some material benefit, such as wage increase or a new car, he must burn an even number of candles. For something to do with the emotions, such as a love affair or a better relationship with one's neighbors, the number must be odd. If the candles burn to extinction or are swept out to sea by the incoming tide, it is a sign the wish will be granted. If, however, they are blown out by the wind, the omen is unfavorable. As the myriads of candles are lit, the macumba drums start to sound and the dancing begins. At first, only a few people dance, rather mechanically, as if performing a necessary but boring duty. As the evening wears on, the numbers increase, and the frenzied, almost orgiastic quality becomes apparent. Eventually, as in voodoo celebrations of Haiti, some of the dancers enter a trance state and become possessed. The gods descend and mount their horses. As in Haiti, those who are possessed seem to lose all consciousness of their own identity. When they return to normal consciousness, cannot remember what happened during the trance state. Out of the great number of dancers on the beach, only a few will achieve the trance state. Nevertheless, it is possible for the interested onlooker to move through the crowds and meet many members of the Macumba pantheon, such as the god of war, the god of thunder, the old black slave, a supernatural being renowned for his powers of healing, or Exu, a sinister identity who is the nearest Macumba equivalent to Satan. In due time, the tide sweeps away Yamanja's gifts. The entranced dancers return to normal consciousness. The worshippers make their way homewards, and the festival is over for another year. The New Year's Eve festival at Copacabana is no mere anachronistic survival from a past age of slavery and superstition. Belief in the existence of the spirit world is alive and well at every level of Brazilian society. Peasants, factory hands, bankers, and politicians almost all believe in gods, demons, and supernatural powers, even if they are not prepared to admit it to skeptical foreigners. This widespread acceptance of the supernatural would seem to extend even to such a prosaic institution as the Brazilian post office. In 1957 and 1964, it issued pictorial stamps in honor of the Spirit's Book and the Gospel According to Spiritism, both works by Allan Kardec, the founding father and first theoretician of Spiritism. Kardec's Spiritism differs from spiritualism in that it incorporates a belief in reincarnation. Its influence on Macumba varies from group to group. Some temples conduct ceremonies that are almost completely Kardecized. It's in parentheses, Kardecized. When the devotees are in a state of trance, they follow a Europeanized pattern of behavior, and their actions are quite as restrained and unalarming as those of any French or English spiritualist medium. In other temples, less influenced by Kardec, those possessed by the gods engage in remarkable and spectacular activities that are seen by the onlookers as evidence of genuine control by otherworldly beings. Such activities include walking on broken bottles, inserting large needles into the cheeks, fire eating, and drinking whole bottles of raw cane spirit within the space of a few minutes, and apparently without any outward effect, any untoward effect. Manifestations of this kind are not as uncontrolled as they may appear. Macumba ceremonies follow a pattern that is quite as predictable in terms of its own conventions as any Christian service. Stylized drum rhythms, dancing, a charged atmosphere of religious expectation, and the practice of deliberate over-breathing, which produces changes in brain chemistry, induce a near hypnotic state in all the participants. When the high priestess calls the gods down, the dancers stop moving one by one. Some bend down and then straighten up, often with a scream, in a trance, possessed by a divinity. Closing the paths. Okay, closing the paths. As in Haiti, so in Brazil, there is a darker side to spirit religion. This is Quimbanda, an evil voodoo whose practitioners work black magic against their own and, for a fee, their clients' enemies. A favorite technique of Quimbanda is closing the paths. This involves casting a spell that blocks the victim's progress to personal happiness. The person who has been subjected to this finds that love and financial matters cause nothing but trouble, that their physical and mental health deteriorate, and that problems arise even in the most ordinary everyday affairs. The American writer David St. Clair seems to have been the victim of such a psychic attack during the time he lived in Brazil. His girlfriend left him, money he was expecting did not arrive, legal difficulties arose over his inheritance, and he contracted malaria. He attributed this misfortune to nothing more sinister than bad luck, until a Brazilian friend, a macumbista, who claimed to have psychic powers, told him that his paths had been closed by Quimbanda. At first, St. Clair thought this was superstitious nonsense. Soon afterward, however, he received a message from a spiritualist source. His maid, a woman named Edna, had employed black magic against him. Each week, it was alleged, she took a used item of clothing to a Quimbanda ceremony. There it was buried while crossing spells were chanted and ceremonial candles burned around it. In addition to this, said the spiritualist, Edna was adding a magical closing powder to his food. St. Clair was still skeptical, but he had seen too many strange things in Brazil to discount completely the idea that black magic was being used against him. He decided to fight fire with fire and to attend a macumba ceremony himself and consult one of the possessed. The first part of the ceremony he attended followed The first part of the ceremony he attended followed the conventional pattern of drumming, dancing, and possession. But then something extraordinary happened. The priestess, who was wearing the customary macumba vestments and regalia, a spotlessly white blouse and shirt with a gold cross at her breast, suddenly left the temple. When she returned a few minutes later, her appearance was completely different. She was clad in filthy red satin tatters. In place of the golden cross was a skull of a human infant, its jaws tied together with black tape. A dead snake wreathed between the staring eye sockets. Laughing insanely, the priestess seized a bottle of rum, gulped half of it down, and announced that she was Exu, the Macumba equivalent of Satan. A long conversation ensued between St. Clair, Exu, and two mediums, one of whom was possessed by Satan's dog. Eventually, Exu, who claimed he sometimes did good as well as evil, told St. Clair the curse has been lifted and will come down doubly on the person who placed it on you. Within a few days, the paths opened for St. Clair. His psychological attitude changed for the better, and perhaps he no longer expected the worst. His health, finances, and love life all improved. Possession of a priestess by a voodoo deity has transformed his outlook on life. This perhaps is the real power of voodoo, macumba, and other Afro-American spirit religions. It is possible that possession by the gods offers the devotee something of greater therapeutic value to a diseased psyche than to orthodox Western remedies. So we're going to take a break there, guys. We're at 156. We're going to take a break before Hitler and the Holy Lance. We're going to get into Hitler part 2. I guess number 2, I guess. I don't know. I don't know how I'm going to number these. I'll number them, I guess. Sure. This podcast is a totally new idea, and I'm glad it's happening. I'm glad you all are listening. And I hope that this book, with its insights and its references, are able to stir in your mind thoughts and realizations about the nature of what are they doing? What is the Epstein class doing? What is now it makes more sense, I hope. At least it gives us a core basis to work from. And then we can get into the more nitty-gritty of the nuts and bolts of it. But this is a really good overview painting of what the general ideas of the occult and occultism and the whole scene. It's really good. I love just these pieces that I've read today. Think about that in reference to what Kubrick has given us. Like, think about what Eyes Wide Shut is depicting, what the rainbow fashions is, what is going on with all that, what are they doing besides the blackmail? There's got to be more to it, right? These guys, they're black magic practitioners. So that's that. I hope this has been very informative for you, the listener. I hope that you can see the value in this and how it relates to the work of Stanley Kubrick and what information he was working with to cognize his depiction of Trom Novell and to turn it into Eyes Wide Shut, this masterwork that he's created. This gives us a little more insight into the minds of those people, right? And Himmler was mentioned earlier, and Aleister Crowley was mentioned briefly. We will go further into those, starting part 2 with Hitler and the Holy Lance. Thank you all for listening. Please share and I don't know. Please continue listening. And I love you and thank you. And we hope that you're here for next time. And we will see you next time on Occult Kubrick.